Hi. Well, so we get started with a presentation that puts finance a bit in perspective and why finance or talking about finance is important when we talk about access or increased access to water supply or sanitation services. Most importantly, what we will be discussing is the increased attention put on financing or funding issues and access that has certainly gained importance in the last decades. And we're trying to bring all this together in this course, and we hope you enjoy it. Just before I continue, I would like to make a small clarification between the use of the terms financing and funding. Also throughout this course and generally, these two terms are used indistinctively, even though they have very significant connotations. We're using funding. We would be referring to that mere action of providing funds for a given project. While when we talk about financing, we discuss the provision of funds in exchange for a return. So it would be funding would be just the provision of funds, so making money available for a specific something. And when we talk about financing, is the provision of those funds with the expectation of getting something in return, normally in the shape of interest or dividends. For simplification purposes, as I said during this course, we probably just use them as one and the same, even though it would be good to keep this distinction in mind because they do have clear consequences on the way things are organized. So what I wanted to discuss in this slide is that there are two increasingly important trends and changes in the sector that we believe have brought up the discussion of financing or funding issues to, say, a more higher level. So with the establishment of the MDGs, there were already increased needs identified to at the time half the population from 1990 without access to improved services. And with the establishment of the SDGs in 2015, that have the ambition of expanding services to all by 2030, the need to find more money to develop the required infrastructure or services has only but increased. Where the money for this actually will be coming from, we will be discussing in later presentations. Furthermore, there is an increased shift or a shift towards a more or a different way or more efficient management of service providers. This shift was already initiated in the 1980s and institutionalized in international conventions or international agreements like the Kampala Statement, by which the financial independence of service providers is celebrated, encouraged, and also seen very much as the only way forward to provide sustainable services, making that emphasis that service providers or service utilities are supposed to basically fund their own operations and investments by themselves. So even though there is an increasingly in the sector different ways of developing services for water supply and sanitation, the sector has been very much characterized by a specific technological choice that is mainly materialized in the form of big treatment plants, centralized networks, with the idea in theory that everybody then has the same access and the same service. We are nowadays far from that idea, or very well aware that there are other developments in the sector and there are many different ways of accessing services, but still formal or the more conventional utilities and government provided services still seem to pursue this idea of developing these types of infrastructure. The consequences of this ideal is that then these initial investments are normally very bulky or significant, big, and therefore also very costly. The returns of these investments are generally slow to materialize, as before everybody is connected or everybody has access through that infrastructure, it takes some time. Once the infrastructure is also put in place, there's little to no alternative use, or rather value, to that infrastructure, but just to provide the services they were designed for. And therefore it becomes an investment that utilities cannot convert into, let's say, bankable collateral. Apart from that, these projects are subject also to many financing risks that are generally related to currency exchanges, provided the fact that the revenues are raised in local currency while the debt is serviced in foreign currency. Water and sanitation infrastructure are also stacked in between these two categories that make their funding and financing possibilities an eternal discussion. No, they serve this economic purpose, and as they potentially serve the development of the economy. And therefore, because they have this use, people claim that they could or should be charged to those actually making use of that infrastructure. But on the other hand, they also have a clear social purpose, such as health systems, a hospital or schools, which make them, in theory, the development of that infrastructure falls under the full responsibility of public finance, which makes it very difficult to decide or to categorize where to put what. Going back to the consequences of this shift in the way water services or sanitation services are managed, water utilities are requested, or sanitation utilities are requested to operate under paradigms mainly labeled under the efficiency wording, right? So and this efficiency is illustrated into management decisions, and therefore also geared towards things like cost containment or better use of their own resources, so better allocation of mainly monetary resources, ensure that there is enough liquidity so that there's enough money to make front to any requirement, and the very well-known full cost recovery, by which utilities should be able to charge enough for water that would allow them to cover all costs. And with this and ending, we get to the, let's say, the greatest hit, or one of the most used words in the water and sanitation sector, and that is the one of achieving financial sustainability. And then what is that, right? There are different definitions of sustainability, but we would consider sustainability to be that of a service that is at the end able to secure service delivery way after it's implemented or first developed. Furthermore, in theory, sustainability is a characteristic that is preferred by any company. Right? Because there is this thinking that if you provide sustainable services, you provide better services, so the customer is happy, and if the customer is happy, you can show better performance, and with better performance, you have happier donors and lenders. But what is then financial sustainability really, right? In theory, you achieve financial sustainability when revenues are greater than costs. But here the question is really, what costs are we really referring to, and which costs are we requesting service providers and water utilities or sanitation utilities to bear? And those decisions affect the way these providers design their expansion strategies, for example. Or it also raises the question of if they are supposed to have revenues greater than costs, do they really have a control over their cost structure that is mainly determined by the type of infrastructure that they have to operate, that is mainly a given? Or are they free to choose, and how do they control revenues? Are they free to establish their own tariffs? Are they choose to cherry pick their customer portfolio, or they are actually mandated to serve everybody, right? So with these questions, we leave you now with a video developed by the Water and Sanitation Program of the World Bank that summarizes a bit the challenges and trends that we try to picture in this presentation. We would also encourage you to read the highlighted pages in the report provided on the website as part of this chapter, as it provides a bit of a more pragmatic view on these challenges that we have been discussing. So